Midnight changed everything for me. It didn't arrive with noise or drama. No thunder. No warning. Just a small vibration on my phone. Resting quietly beside my pillow, I remember staring at the ceiling, half awake, half lost in my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anything. At that hour, the world usually forgets you exist. That's why the sound felt so strange, like a whisper cutting through silence. I reached for my phone without thinking. The screen lit up the room. One message that first, I smiled. I thought it was a mistake. People send the wrong things at night all the time. Wrong chats, wrong names, regrets they wish they could pull back. But the smile didn't last because the first thing I saw was my name, not written with care, not written with love, written like a problem. My heart slowed, then started beating too fast. I sat up in bed, suddenly fully awake. My fingers cold against the glass screen. I read the message again. Then again, each word landed heavier than the last. It was clear within seconds that this message was never meant for me. I was reading something private, something hidden, something planned. They were talking about me, not wondering. Not guessing, not planning. I scrolled. My hands shaking now, my breathing shallow. Another message followed. Then another. Each one felt like a door slamming shut behind me. They talked about tomorrow. About papers. About signatures. About how Emily won't see it coming. That line burned itself into my mind. Emily won't see it coming. I had trusted these people with my life. I had defended them when others doubted them. I had ignored my instincts for years because I believed loyalty was stronger than fear. And there I was, at midnight, learning that my trust had made me invisible. I didn't cry, not at first. I just stared. I remember thinking how quiet the room was, how peaceful everything looked. The same walls, the same bed, the same life, yet nothing was the same anymore. I realized something in that moment that still makes my chest feel tight even now. The betrayal didn't start that night. That night was just the moment I finally caught it, before midnight. My life had felt normal, stable even. I had routines. I had people I relied on, people whose voices I trusted more than my own thoughts. I was the kind of person who believed silence meant respect, that not arguing meant maturity, that staying calm meant strength. I didn't push. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't question intentions. I thought love and loyalty didn't need to be tested. I was wrong. There had been signs long before the message. Small things I chose to ignore. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Meetings I wasn't invited to anymore. Decisions made for my own good. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself they would never hurt me. Why would they? They knew me. They knew my fears, my habits, my weaknesses. They knew I trusted easily. That's what made it so easy for them. As I lay there that night, phone glowing in my hands, every memory replayed differently. Every smile felt fake. Every reassurance felt rehearsed. The message wasn't cruel in its words. That's what made it worse. It was calm, organized, confident. They weren't angry at me. They were comfortable betraying me. I checked the sender's name again. Someone close. Someone I had laughed with. Someone who had promised they would always have my back. My chest tightened as I realized how carefully everything had been done. No rushed decisions. No emotional mistakes. They had planned this slowly, quietly, patiently, and they believed I would never notice. I placed the phone down beside me, my mind racing too fast to rest. I stared into the darkness, listening to my own breathing, wondering how long they had been lying to my face. Minutes passed, or hours. I'm not sure. At some point, the shock faded, replaced by something sharper, clearer awareness. I understood then that crying wouldn't help me. Confronting them wouldn't help me. Not yet. If I reacted now, they would adjust. They would hide better, so I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I stayed quiet. I let them believe I was still asleep. The next morning I woke up like nothing had happened. I followed my routine. I smiled when spoken to. I nodded. I listened and they watched me. I could feel it. Their eyes searched my face, trying to find cracks, trying to see if guilt had exposed them. I gave them nothing inside. Though everything was changing, every word they said sounded different now. Every explanation felt thin. Every promise felt like a delay tactic. They talked about the future like they controlled it. They didn't realize I was already rewriting mine. I began paying attention in a way I never had before, not emotionally, strategically. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed patterns, timelines, small details that once seemed meaningless. I realized how much information people reveal when they think you're harmless. When they think you won't fight back. They were wrong about me, but I didn't rush. I let days pass. Then weeks. Each interaction added another piece to the picture. Another confirmation that the message wasn't an accident. It was a window into a reality they had carefully hidden. They thought silence meant ignorance. They never considered it might mean patience. I remember one evening in particular. We were sitting together laughing about something small. I watched their faces as they spoke. The ease. The confidence they truly believed they had already won. And that was when I made my decision. I wouldn't expose them with emotion. I would expose them with truth, not shouted, not dramatic. Clean, clear, final dot. I started gathering what I needed. Not stealing, not breaking rules, just paying attention, reading what I had once trusted blindly, asking questions I had been afraid to ask before. I wasn't seeking revenge fueled by anger. I was seeking balance because betrayal doesn't just take something from you. It teaches you who you are when everything familiar disappears. And I was done. Being the version of Emily they underestimated, I didn't change overnight. That's something people misunderstand. They think awareness turns you into someone else instantly. It doesn't. It sharpens you slowly, quietly, like a blade being polished in the dark. I kept behaving the same way on the surface. Same tone, same patience, same willingness to listen. But inside, I was no longer participating in the story they had written for me. I was observing it, and observation gives you power. I started noticing how often my name came up when I wasn't supposed to hear it. How conversations shifted when I entered rooms. How plans were made without asking me, then presented as finished decisions. Before, I would have questioned myself, wondered if I was being sensitive. Now, I trusted what I saw. Trusting myself felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous, but also freeing. I realized how much I had shrunk to make others comfortable. How often I stayed quiet just to keep peace that only benefited them. They had grown used to that version of me. The agreeable Emily, the patient Emily, the Emily who never pushed back. That was their biggest mistake, because once you stop needing approval, you start seeing everything clearly. I didn't confront anyone because confrontation gives people time to lie. Instead, I listened. I let them talk. People always reveal the truth when they think you're on their side. They talked about time, about next steps, about how everything was almost settled. They spoke with certainty, like the future was already signed and sealed. They spoke like I wasn't part of it. That hurt more than the message itself. Being betrayed is painful. But being erased while you're still standing there hurts in a different way, like you've already been replaced by a version of yourself that doesn't exist. Some nights. I sat alone replaying everything in my head. The laughter, the promises, the late talks where they said they cared. I wondered if any of it had been real, or if I had just been useful. That thought kept me awake more than anger ever could, but I didn't let the sadness slow me down. I used it to stay alert. I began organizing everything in my mind. Who said what? When things changed, who benefited from those changes? Patterns became visible once emotion stepped aside. I realized the betrayal wasn't sudden. It had layers. It had steps, each one small enough to seem harmless on its own. That's how they justified it. They probably told themselves they weren't hurting me, that I would be fine, that I wouldn't even notice. They underestimated how much silence hears. There were moments when I wanted to speak up, moments when I wanted to drop the truth in the middle of the room and watch their faces fall. But I stopped myself because exposure without preparation is just noise. I wanted impact. I wanted them to understand exactly what they had done, without shouting, without chaos, without giving them the chance to twist the story. I wanted the truth to stand on its own, so I waited. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It means choosing the right moment. I kept copies of everything that mattered. I read carefully. I asked neutral questions. I learned how decisions were officially made and who actually held responsibility. I learned who relied on whose silence. And slowly, I realized something important. Their entire plan depended on one thing: me staying the same, me not asking questions, me trusting blindly. Once that changed, everything they built became fragile. They didn't notice the shift because I didn't announce it. I didn't change my tone or my routine. I didn't become cold or distant. I became precise. There's a calm that comes when you stop being afraid of losing people who were already willing to lose you. That calm terrified them without them knowing why. I could feel it in the way they hesitated around me, in the way their jokes fell flat, in the way they started explaining things too much. Guilt has a sound. It's subtle, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I remember one conversation clearly. Someone laughed and said, "Emily, you're so easygoing. You never make things difficult." I smiled, but inside, I thought, not anymore. That night, alone again, I replayed the midnight message in my head, not with pain this time, but with purpose. They had given me a gift without realizing it. They had shown me who they really were before it was too late, and I promised myself something quietly. With no witnesses, I would not let their comfort cost me my future. I wouldn't destroy them loudly. I would let them collapse under the weight of their own certainty. Days passed, then more days. The closer they got to their final step, the more confident they became. Confidence makes people careless. It makes them stop checking their footing. They started speaking openly, assuming I was still unaware. Assuming I was still harmless, they assumed wrong. I remember the exact moment I knew the timing was approaching. A casual comment. A passing remark? Just a few more details and everything will be finalized. I nodded, like always. But my mind was already ahead. I had prepared quietly. I had aligned everything I needed. I had made sure that when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't be questioned because the most powerful truth doesn't need defending. It just exists. I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel fear. I felt steady. And that's when I knew they had already lost something they could never get back. Control. They had planned my future without my voice now. They were about to hear it * by the time I realized how close they were to finishing everything. I had already stopped seeing them the way I once did. They weren't family anymore. They weren't partners. They were players following a script they believed was flawless. And I was the invisible variable. They forgot to calculate. What surprised me most was how normal everything still looked from the outside. We shared the same spaces, the same routines, the same polite conversations. Anyone watching would have thought nothing was wrong. That's how betrayal survives. It hides inside normal days. There were moments when I caught myself almost slipping back into the old Emily, the one who wanted harmony more than truth, the one who would soften her words to avoid discomfort. Change isn't instant. It argues with you. It tests you. But then, I would remember the message. The calm way they talked about removing me from decisions that shaped my own life. The confidence with which they assumed I would accept whatever they left behind, and the hesitation disappeared. I began seeing everything clearly now. Not just what they were doing, but why. They didn't think of themselves as villains. They saw themselves as practical, efficient, doing what needed to be done. People always justify betrayal by calling it necessity. That understanding didn't excuse them, but it made my next steps easier. I wasn't dealing with emotion. I was dealing with patterns. I noticed how they avoided specifics when I asked questions. How they redirected conversations when things got too detailed. How they reassured instead of explained. Reassurance is what people offer when they don't want you to look too closely, so I looked closer. I double-checked time. I traced decisions back to their origin. I learned which agreements mattered and which ones were just distractions. The more I learned, the calmer I became, because fear comes from uncertainty, and I was running out of uncertainty. There was a strange loneliness in all of this. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not yet. Explaining it too early would only spread confusion. I needed clarity before I needed comfort, so I carried it alone. Some nights the weight of it pressed hard against my chest. I would sit in silence wondering how many smiles had been fake, how many conversations had been rehearsed. I wondered if they ever felt guilty then. I realized something important. Guilt wasn't part of their plan. They didn't feel bad because they believed. I would never know that realization hurt. But it also strengthened me. I wasn't fighting against cruelty. I was correcting arrogance as the final phase of their plan approached. I noticed a shift in their behavior. They became lighter, more relaxed. As if a burden had already been lifted, they laughed more, made future plans freely, spoke about after everything settles. They had already moved on in their minds, and I was still sitting right there invisible. Doesn't mean powerless. It means underestimated. I began preparing for the moment. Everything would surface. Not with speeches, not with accusations. I prepared with facts, with timing, with restraint. I imagined the room, the silence, the moment their confidence would fracture. Not because I raised my voice, but because reality would interrupt them. I didn't fantasize about revenge. I didn't picture them suffering. That kind of thinking only keeps you tied to what hurt you. I pictured clarity. I pictured standing firm while the truth spoke for me. The night before everything was supposed to be finalized, I slept better than I had in weeks. That surprised me. I thought I would be anxious instead. I felt settled. I had done everything I could do. Whatever happened next would not happen in the dark. The next day began like any other. Normal greetings, casual talk, the usual rhythm. They didn't sense anything different. Why would they? They believed the story was over. When the moment finally arrived, it wasn't dramatic at first. No shouting, no sudden movement. Just a shift, a question that shouldn't have been asked, a detail that didn't align, a pause that lasted just a little too long. I watched their faces change in small ways, confusion flickering behind their eyes. The first crack in their certainty. They looked at each other before looking at me. That told me everything. When the truth unfolded, it didn't rush. It revealed itself slowly, piece by piece, like something inevitable. Something no one could stop once it started. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. They tried to explain, to adjust, to reframe, but explanations only work when the listener is unsure. I wasn't. The room felt different then, heavier, quieter, like the air itself had shifted for the first time. They weren't in control of the narrative, and it showed. They avoided my eyes, cleared their throats, chose their words carefully now. Carefully. The way they should have from the beginning. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, validation, but not triumph, because winning doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like the end of pretending. When it was over, when the truth had settled where it belonged, I didn't linger. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't ask for understanding. That I stood up and walked away. Not because I was weak, but because I was done. Walking away felt like stepping into a version of my life that had been waiting quietly for me to choose it. They lost something that day, not just a plan. They lost access to me, and that loss was permanent. After I walked away, the world didn't suddenly become peaceful. That's something no one tells you. Ending betrayal doesn't erase the damage it leaves behind. It just stops the bleeding. For a while, everything felt quiet in a strange way. Not calm, not empty, just unfamiliar. Like standing in a room after all the furniture has been removed. You know it's yours, but you don't recognize it yet. I replayed that final moment many times in my head. Not because I doubted myself, but because my mind was trying to adjust to a new truth. The truth that I was no longer living inside someone else's plan. There were no dramatic apologies afterward. No long messages explaining feelings. Just distance, awkwardness, avoidance. People who are exposed don't rush to face the person who saw them clearly, and that was fine with me. I didn't need their explanations anymore. I had already heard everything I needed to hear through their actions. Words at that point would have only been another attempt to soften reality. What surprised me was how my body reacted once it was over. The tension I had been carrying for months, maybe years, didn't disappear right away. It released slowly in waves. Some days I felt light, almost free. Other days, the sadness hit without warning. I grieved more than I expected, not for what they did, but for what I thought we were. I grieved the version of myself that trusted without fear. The Emily who believed loyalty was shared simply because she offered it. That version of me didn't survive the betrayal, but something stronger did. As time passed, I started seeing the past differently. Moments that once confused me now made sense. The subtle dismissals, the way my opinions were acknowledged and then ignored, the way my presence became optional. I had mistaken tolerance for respect. That realization hurt, but it also explained everything. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. People don't ignore red flags because they're foolish. They ignore them because they hope, because they love, because they don't want to imagine the worst about people who matter to them. Hope is not weakness, but staying after the truth reveals itself is. I began rebuilding quietly. Not my life on the outside, but my relationship with myself. I paid attention to how I spoke to myself when I made decisions. I noticed when doubt crept in, wearing the voice of people who no longer had access to me at first. I still heard them in my head. Don't overreact. Be patient. Keep the peace. Those words had shaped me for so long that silence felt uncomfortable without them. But slowly, a new voice grew stronger. Mine. I learned how to trust my discomfort instead of explaining it away. I learned that clarity doesn't always feel gentle. Sometimes it feels sharp because it's cutting you free. I also noticed how different people treated me once the situation was over. Some were suddenly careful with their words. Others avoided me entirely. A few reached out, curious, cautious, as if reassessing who I was now. That told me something important. They weren't reacting to what I did. They were reacting to the fact that I had boundaries. Nothing makes people uncomfortable faster than realizing they can't control you anymore. I didn't correct rumors. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't chase understanding. I let the truth stand without decoration, because when you explain yourself too much, you invite negotiation. And I wasn't negotiating my self-respect. There were moments when anger surfaced unexpectedly. Not explosive anger, but a quiet resentment. I would remember something kind I had done, something I had sacrificed, and feel a tightness in my chest. In those moments, I reminded myself of something crucial. I didn't lose because I was kind. They lost because they were careless. Kindness only becomes a weakness when it's given to people who misuse it. Now, I was choosing where it went. As weeks turned into months, the weight lifted more. I felt more present, more honest with myself. Decisions became easier because they were no longer filtered through fear of disappointing people who had already decided to betray me. I realized how much energy betrayal consumes, How much of yourself it steals when you're trying to understand why people hurt you instead of accepting that they did. Letting go wasn't about forgiveness, it was about reclaiming space in my mind. One evening, sitting alone, I thought back to the midnight message that started everything. The accidental confession, the careless words sent at the wrong time. I realized something then that made me smile. For the first time about the whole situation, they thought the message was their mistake, but it was my turning point. Without it, I might still be doubting myself, still minimizing discomfort, still shrinking to fit places that no longer had room for me. That message didn't destroy my life. It exposed a lie I had been living inside, and exposure is painful, but it's also freeing. I didn't come out of this louder. I didn't become colder. I didn't harden my heart. I became clearer about what I deserve, clear about what I will no longer accept, clear about the fact that trust is not something people are entitled to just because they've known you for a long time. I stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. That alone changed everything. Asterisk. Time has a way of settling things when you finally stop fighting yourself. After everything ended, after the noise faded and the distance became permanent, I found myself standing in a quieter place than I had ever known. Not empty, not lonely, just honest. For the first time in a long while, my days weren't shaped by anticipation or fear. I wasn't waiting for approval. I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment. I was simply living inside my own choices. That felt strange at first. When you've spent so much time adjusting yourself to fit other people's expectations, freedom doesn't feel exciting right away. It feels unfamiliar, almost suspicious, like you're waiting for something to go wrong, but nothing did. Instead, I noticed how much lighter I felt, how my thoughts flowed without constantly looping back to what someone else might think, how my body relaxed when I entered rooms, no longer scanning faces for signs of disapproval. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been for so long. I started doing small things differently, saying no without explaining, choosing rest without guilt, trusting my instincts without asking for permission. Each small decision rebuilt something inside me that betrayal had cracked but never destroyed. Confidence doesn't come from winning against others. It comes from finally standing with yourself. People sometimes ask me now how I stayed calm through everything, how I didn't explode, how I didn't lose myself in anger. The truth is, I did feel anger. I felt sadness. I felt shock so deep it took my breath away, but I also felt something stronger. Clarity. Clarity teaches you that reacting isn't power. Understanding is. If I had confronted them that first night, I would have given them control of the story. They would have denied, deflected, and reshaped the truth until I doubted myself again. Instead, I waited. And waiting taught me patience, strategy, and self-respect. I learned that people who betray you often expect one of two reactions: silence that allows them to continue, or emotion that allows them to dismiss you. They rarely expect awareness. They rarely expect you to see them clearly and walk away without begging for answers. That's what unsettles them the most. I don't hate them now. Hate keeps you tied to the past. I don't need that tie anymore. What I feel instead is distance. Clean, quiet distance. I understand now that betrayal says more about the people who choose it than the person who survives it. It reveals character. It exposes priorities. It draws a clear line between who you thought someone was and who they actually are. And sometimes, that line is a gift. I no longer romanticize loyalty without evidence. I no longer confuse familiarity with safety. I no longer assume that time spent together guarantees honesty. Those lessons were expensive, but they were real. I've also learned something else, something important. Not every betrayal arrives as a dramatic explosion. Some arrive quietly, disguised as planning, wrapped in calm words, sent at midnight by mistake. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've ever felt pushed aside without explanation, talked about instead of talked to, replaced without being told, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not imagining it. Your awareness is not betrayal. Your questions are not disloyalty. Your boundaries are not cruelty. And silence doesn't mean you're powerless. Sometimes silence is the space where you decide who you're becoming. I didn't lose everything that night. I lost illusions. And in return, I gained myself. The Emily who stands here now doesn't need to be included in secret plans. She doesn't need to prove her worth to people who couldn't see it. She doesn't need closure from those who never offered honesty. She already has what matters. If my story stayed with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel a little less alone, then I'm glad you were here with me until the end. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about truth, strength, and quiet resilience, make sure you stay connected. Subscribe, support the channel, and be part of this space where real stories are told without masks. Until next time, remember this. What's revealed in the dark doesn't destroy you, it shows you the way out.